who is talking to us at 7:15 in the morning tomorrow, Friday, from Melbourne, Australia. Rob, is that correct?
It is absolutely correct, Ron.
Well, thanks for getting up early. I'm getting ready for happy hour.
Yes, well, you're a good part of the day. It's TGO Friday here for us, so it's this Friday, and no, it's obviously it's a pleasure to see you. So, good afternoon to Memphis, and from good morning here in Melbourne.
Now, when were you, Rob? The students have a bio on you, and they also have a couple of questions when we get to that part of the talk. But they know that you were with Holiday Inn Worldwide a few years ago, and I assume you've been in Memphis at some point.
I have indeed, and it was interesting. I just sort of preparing some notes for this chat, and my sort of few visits to Memphis were very pleasurable. And one of the things that stand out was on my first trip, which is I can't remember exactly, but it would have been around about probably 1987, 86. And I was asked to come to Memphis for a meeting. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but I do remember going to the headquarters on Lamar Avenue, and I stayed in the Holiday Inn that was next door. And after the first day in the office, one of the things I did notice, find wonderful about Memphis was everyone I met was incredibly hospitable and welcoming. And a group of ladies from the reservations office took me out to a bar. And we were sitting at the table, and the waitress came up and asked me what I would like to have. And I said, well, I'll have a beer. And she looked at me rather strangely and asked me to repeat my order. And I did, and I still got the same response. That went off about 3 times. And I thought, I can't imagine what's the challenge, because beer is probably the most basic order you can make in a bar. And one of the girls who was with me nudged me and said, honey, say it with 5 E's and 4 R's, it's a beer. And I'd never realized to that point that beer was a 4-syllable word. So I hope that you can understand me with my accent. And if you don't, please ask or let me know, and I'll do my best. I won't be offended. But
we'll put closed captioning on or something.
So no, it was obviously a very different time then. It was a wonderful time. I thought the company in those days, when it was in Memphis, I think it had a very strong family feeling to it. You'd go to the car park and half the cars would, have I Love Holiday Inn stickers on them. Well, not many companies would have that in their car park these days. Their family sort of so in love with the jobs that they had and the company that they worked for. So, yes, Chris, I had several visits to Memphis. I can't remember exactly how many until the time that the company then was acquired by a British group, Bass, and relocated to Atlanta. And it was around that time that I met our mutual friend, Ron Roy, and I stayed with the company for some time. So look, I'm happy to perhaps go through a little bit of background up front, and then we can sort of perhaps talk about sort of the industry as it is today. But it was, I did watch the video of Daniel Delomo's presentation to you last week. Daniel's set a very high bar. He's a very successful international hotelier. I have met him, and I used to work closely with his father. So this is one of the nice things about this business, the connections that we make. But around the time that I did go to Memphis, Mr. Delomo Sr. was working also for Holiday Inn, and he was based in Brussels, in Belgium. And he was the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the European Middle East division. And I had a similar job with Holiday Inn. I was based in Hong Kong, and I was the head of sales and marketing. So Louis and I would meet each other every now and then on either company events or international shows and conferences. And it was just one of the many wonderful friends I've been able to make through this wonderful business that we're in. So it is a side benefit that's not necessarily advertised or promoted that much about the hospitality business, but it is a people business, and it has been for me a wonderful experience, and have made some marvelous friends and connections through it. I sort of fell into the hotel business. When I was growing up and then at school, I had no intention, I hadn't even thought about hospitality. It hadn't crossed my mind. I mean, the closest I came to hospitality is I had, while I was at college, a part-time job for a while in a KFC outlet and working in the kitchen, which is pretty hard work. But that was it. And that was just a job to sort of help pay my way. But at the time, I wanted to be a journalist and to focus on the business and financial world. Due to various circumstances, I ended up in public relations, not actually with a newspaper or magazine, but it was a job where I could still write, albeit for a different audience. And the firm that I worked for had a number of clients in the tourism industry, and through that I got to know some folk who worked in different aspects. And then one day I was asked if I'd be interested in applying for a job with Holiday Inn. And in those days, Holiday Inn had no hotels in Australia. They did have an office in Melbourne, and they had an office in Sydney. But the role of those offices was purely sales and to promote the Holiday Inn chain around the world to Australian tourists and travel agents. So my job was a sales role to promote the company, and it was mainly, as I said, hotels across Asia and Europe where Australians were traveling. So this sort of tweaked my interest, and here we are many, many years later, still associated with the business. And the thing I remember most about my first interview was my future boss made a comment about this business being one where you had every opportunity or potential to be able to go and travel and to potentially work in other countries and other cities. And that sort of appealed to me a lot. I hadn't really thought of that, but I'd always wanted to travel, and I thought, well, this might be a job that can help me achieve that ambition as well. So I spent the first year working in Melbourne doing sales work, and then I was transferred to the Sydney office and was asked to take care of the local call centre for reservations. And remember, guys, this is the 1980s. There's no internet, there's no mobile telephones, personal computers had just been launched, so the world was a very different place. So I spent this time with a small team of people taking calls from around Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific, and making bookings through what's now a pretty antiquated way of doing it, but it was Holiday Inn's state-of-the-art reservation system called Holodex, and I'm sure you remember that, Chris.
Sure.
And it was a system that was based on American Airlines passenger booking system. Confirmations were then printed out and actually stuck into envelopes and mailed out to the clients. I mean, it's unthinkable these days, but that's how we did business, and it was state-of-the-art then. During that time there in Sydney, after I'd been working in the reservations office for approximately a year, the company did secure its first hotel in Australia. And it was a large hotel in Sydney. It was a 440-room full-service property, and I was appointed as its director of sales. It's a busy hotel. It had lots of international guests. It had a big food and beverage operation, a lot of staff. The team all worked hard, and we all got on well together. And that's when I sort of realized this is really the business I do want to be in and stay in. Very much a people business, and challenging, but it was just the right fit for me, amazingly. During this time, and this is where I sort of started to get the experience of travel, the company took its first step into China. Holiday Inn was the first international brand to operate a hotel in China, and this was a large hotel in Beijing. And to help promote this new destination, the company had arranged for a group of Australian journalists to travel to China to spend a week staying in the hotel, and obviously do some sightseeing at the same time. And my colleague who led this trip, unfortunately, at the last minute for her, had to drop out of the trip through personal circumstances, and I was asked to take her place. although I felt very sorry for her, I was thrilled to have this opportunity and experience. China in the 1980s was just starting to open to visitors, and it was a vastly different place to what it is now. I mean, you probably see images of China. Looks very modern, freeways, busy cities, but it certainly was a vastly different place in those days. I mean, there were almost no cars. People either walked or rode bicycles. There were trucks and some trolley buses around, but it was very, very primitive compared to what we were familiar with both in Australia and the US. But it was an extraordinary opportunity to see this and to experience China at that time. And that was really a very important move for Holiday Inn in those days, because even today, China is now one of the largest markets the company has. They had an early start and a long lead, maybe one of the largest international brands operating in China. So, as I said, vastly different. And I had the chance to see some of the attractions of China and also how people lived. I mean, they lived in communes. So the concept of co-living is not new. The communists had it figured out a long time ago. So, as I said, now China, I've been back many times since, but has grown dramatically into a very largely modern country. So I had my time in Sydney, and then I was asked if I would like to take a position in the Hong Kong office. And the Hong Kong office was the sort of the centre for the Asian business. It was still very small compared to what was in the US. I think there were 30 or 40 hotels across the region in those days, in the major cities of Asia, places like Bangkok, Singapore, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, and so forth. And I was in a marketing role, and I had the chance to travel a lot across the region, and which I loved. And again, it was a great way to make new contacts and to meet people from different backgrounds and different cultures. This was the time that I started to go to Memphis and to meet some of the folk there and do some work with it. So yes, I was really in a great place. I thought at the time I was relatively young, traveling a lot, enjoying my work, and felt very fortunate about that. After what ended up being 8 years in Hong Kong, I thought it was only a 2-year assignment. I ended up being transferred to Japan, and this time it was a general management role. I was asked to be the area manager for Japan, Korea, and Micronesia. And Micronesia, if you're not familiar, is largely under US control. It's the islands of Guam and Saipan, where there's a strong military presence, but very popular with Japanese tourists. So that was hence the connection. It was reasonably close to Japan, and that's why the Tokyo office took care of that area. So part of the job was to operate a marketing function, but also to help grow the business. And we were able to enter Korea as a new market for the company and to grow the presence in Japan. After that period of 4 years, during this time, I had met my wife and we'd started the family, and I was sort of keen to get back to Australia to give my children a chance to experience a little bit of time growing up in the country of my background. And so the company agreed to my request, and I returned to Sydney, where I ran the Australian business there for a year. And unfortunately for me, that it didn't work out. I'd inherited a new boss, a new guy had come in to take over the business for Asia. I guess I'd just say the chemistry wasn't right, and it was not really what I wanted to be doing. So I did something rather brave. I quit my job with that one to go to, and the family, we relocated to Melbourne, where I really sort of wanted to end up. So I had a period of responsibilities, no job. I had to do something. So I did a little bit of advisory work, and Mr. Owens and my mutual friend, Ron Roy, asked me to act as a representative for the Sol Media group, which had a small presence in Asia, a large Spanish chain. And you may recall Daniel Delamo also referred to that group. He had also done some time working there as well. But after a short period of that, I was sort of keen to get back into a mainstream job, and I had the chance to join the Marriott company. And in those days, Marriott owned the Ramada brand internationally. There were two brands that really had split presence. Hilton, there was Hilton Corporation, which is for all the Hiltons in North America, and Hilton International for all the others, and they were owned by different groups, and the same with Ramada What is now Wyndham owned the Ramada business in the United States, and outside of the US it was owned by Marriott. So the job I had was an Asia-based job. I was responsible for the Ramada brand across Asia, and we sort of knew what the job was, and that was to basically build the business, to build value so that it could ultimately be sold to Wyndham. I think Marriott had no intention of retaining the brand beyond that. They had inherited it through another acquisition. So I had nearly 3.5, 4 years with the group, and most of my time was on the road. I had a strange life. I had a home in Melbourne, an office in Hong Kong, and spent an awful lot of time on planes. But we made some good progress in places like China, India, Indonesia, in growing the brand, and it grew quite significantly during that time. As is often the case, again, I received a phone call one day from someone I'd met in my travels who worked for Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, and asked me if I would be interested in returning to Japan to work with them to help set up a group that would take care of hotels that they had invested in or were intending to. So this was a very different business, albeit still related to hotels, but again, I had never expected to work for an investment bank. So I took the job and moved to their Tokyo headquarters. They had a very big business in investing in real estate through their funds, and up until then it had been commercial, residential, industrial real estate. They had a single hotel of 120 rooms in Osaka. And I thought, well, I hope I'm doing the right thing here, because it's a pretty small business compared to what I was used to. But the next 2 hotels they bought were both 600-room properties, and the business grew very quickly. So, and the people I needed to work with me were not bankers, but I needed people with hotel backgrounds. So we built a team, and it ultimately was spun off from the mainstream of the investment bank to a business we called Panorama Hospitality, and it continued to grow. We had at a peak 49 hotels in the system, which were largely upscale across Japan, in Europe, and then other places. We had, I think, 1 or 2 properties in China, 1 in Korea, and several in Australia. In the end of 2007, I was asked to move to the London office to help grow the business there, and which I did. But the following year was 2008, and some of you may not remember too clearly, but 2008 was a pretty tough time. The global financial crisis hit. It has different names in different parts of the world. In Japan, it was called Lehman Shock. I think it was called subprime in the US. We called it the GFC, or the global financial crisis, but it had a huge impact on our business. And it sort of was almost the end of the game. We saw the office I worked in London was next to the Lehman Brothers office, and I saw 3,000 people lose their job in one day. The building went dark. We thought our business may be about to suffer a similar fate. Fortunately, it didn't, but I was asked to go back to Japan, and I spent 2009 doing a lot of unpleasant work, mainly letting people go, and restructuring the business and scaling it right back. And I can tell you that that side of human resources is never any fun, no matter where you are. I mean, telling someone that they've lost their job is something terrible, and obviously it's much worse for them. It doesn't matter, people have family responsibilities and so forth. So guys, as you go forward in your careers and become managers, always remember that people that work with you also have similar personal circumstances, and their jobs are very important to them as well. So at the end of all of that, what had been a wonderful time, but I had a tough year. I decided it was perhaps time to come back to Australia, which I did early 2010, and formed the business that I now work with some of our colleagues. It's an advisory business, and we focus mainly on new hotel development. My first client was a Hong Kong-based company, because I didn't have much of a network in Australia. I'd been away for a long time, and then the second one was real estate group in China, so I was still traveling back and forward, but over time the business started to get traction in Australia, and now after 10 years I have been involved with the firm that is now known as Lynette Prime Square. There are 3 partners, another one I have in Melbourne, we have another branch in Sydney, and a small group of folk that, as I said, work in mainly the development side of the business, working with investors and developers who are looking to start hotel projects but need some assistance with viability studies, the financing and the bankability. So we do a lot of that type of work, demand studies, looking at competitive groups and settings, and structuring new projects in such a way that they hopefully can be successful. Having lived through the challenge of 2008, we're now living through the challenge of this year, 2010, and the COVID pandemic, which is affecting every one of us around the world. We see a lot of news from what's happening in the US. It's a similar situation in Australia, where it's had a dramatic impact, particularly on the hospitality and tourism businesses. In the city that I'm in Melbourne, is the one that's been hardest hit in Australia. Most of the hotels are shut, or they're operating on a skeleton staff and being used for isolation for people who have caught COVID but don't need to be in hospital, but do need to be isolated. So it's had a devastating impact on our business here, and I know it has in the US and around the world. It will pass, and we are seeing signs of recovery in different parts of the world. I think different governments have treated it in different ways, and a bit like this again you have in the US. Here it's a largely state responsibility, so different states have taken different approaches, but we're still in a difficult situation, but seeing signs of recovery, and I'm very confident for the future that we will bounce back. Most of the business here is domestic. I mean, international travel is basically been brought to a standstill. I think there's signs of life now in Europe, but here, I mean, some of the state borders are closed. And so now hotels are having to re-engage with their local communities and market their properties in a different way. And I'm sure that's happening for you as well. I think this is going to have a big impact on our business going forward in the way that hotels operate. The whole essence of hospitality will have to change, where it was very much a meet and greet business and spending time with groups and conferences and conventions and meetings being a primary reason for people to stay in hotels. I think that is going to change. On the new projects that we're looking at that are being built now, they are looking at ways of making the interaction with guests as contactless as possible, whether it's faucets and bathrooms or using mobile phones to open doors, and meals being delivered at doors and not sort of handed over, and social distancing within restaurants. So all the economics are going to shift, but I still have confidence. I think it's in the nature of humans to want to travel and to get out and about and to do business. I mean, I'm enjoying talking to you and seeing your faces on my screen, but I think it would be a much more enjoyable experience if we could actually be in the same room together. And I look forward to the day that will come. So that's sort of a view there. But I think we're also in our business facing other changes that are driven by different forces. We look at the influence of Airbnb around the world, a business that 10 years ago didn't exist. We look at the way reservations are transacted through online travel agents, which are massive businesses that control huge chunks of hotel inventory. Again, were barely there 10 years ago. I mean, they were, but nowhere with the power and influence they have over the business. And I think that's one area where we will see change. I'm not a fan of Airbnb because of its disruption, but I certainly acknowledge and it's been a very successful business. But one of the things that strikes me is their cost of doing business is very low. The fees that they charge to transact bookings for both the owners and the guests are very low. I look at online travel agents their transaction costs are very high. Commissions that are paid to online travel agents are in the range of 15 to 20%, which is huge. I mean, from a hotel point of view, if you sell a room for $200, $40 has gone straight out the door to the online travel agent before it goes to the owners or the operators. But imagine if the technology that Airbnb have, which is every bit as advanced as online travel agents, decided to get into their space and lower the transaction costs dramatically. I think we would see a huge upheaval in that business. I wouldn't want to be a shareholder in Expedia or Travelocity when that day comes, and I suspect that's not far away. I think the other thing we're seeing a very big shift in, certainly in this country, and I'm sure again it's the same for you, it's a new expression, a new word that's been invented called hotelization, or hotelization of real estate. There's a realization now that in other forms of real estate, they can learn a lot and adapt hotel practices and skills. If you think of going into a big office building where there's a information or a concierge desk where they're greeting visitors and taking care of tenants, the skills that are required for that are very, very similar to the front desk in a hotel. Big office buildings and cities around the world are now having to add extra amenities, whether they be fitness centres or putting Starbucks in the lobby, or other forms such as that, operating valet services for their tenants. Again, it's all based on hotel practice. It's the same with condominiums or apartment buildings. A lot of the skills that are required to manage and operate these buildings and to take care of their tenants are very similar to that of what's required in hotels. And this is continuing across in many different ways. So one of the things that we're seeing is a morphing or a blurring of the lines between the different asset classes, and actually hospitality is in the lead here. So for those of you, I think probably everyone here is looking to build a career in the hospitality business, I think it's going to open up the opportunities for jobs in ways that we couldn't have conceived not so long ago. So I think there is great career potential just beyond the larger hotel groups and individual properties, but in other real estate classes as well, where you can utilise the skills you're learning today. So look, it's a dynamic business. I commend you all and wish you very well in your studies and in future careers. It is a marvellous business. It's one that wonderful friendships can be made. There's not too many businesses where we have this sort of opportunity to make lifelong friendships and connections in an industry. It's remarkable. Here you were talking to Daniel Deloma last. I know him through his dad, through a common friend of ours, Mr. Roman Mine, and I have many other connections from people around the world that I would have never had the chance to have met if I hadn't worked in the hotel business. So it's not just the studies guys, but it's the connections you make, and these connections will also help you. I mean, apart from my first job with Holiday Inn, I haven't had to apply for another job in this business. It's always been through a connection or a lead that came from a friend or a contact that I've made. So value the friendships you make in this business as much as you do the jobs and the companies and hotels that you work for, because it will set you on a path for the rest of your life and make friends. And here's Mr. Rado and I talking about Corvette cars earlier on. It wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for us both working for Holiday Inn many, many years ago. So look, that's sort of my overview for now. I've probably gone over time. Chris, I'm sorry about that, but
you're fine. You're fine.
And do my best to answer them.
Hello.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How about you?
I'm good too. Ashi, have you unmuted all of us?
I do see some mute symbols there, but look, I'm fine. Whoever wants, excuse me, whoever would like to talk, I'd love to have a chat and to answer any questions.
Well, let's start. Who's got a question for Rob? Who's first up?
I'd like to ask him a question, please.
Yes, your name's Mary?
Yes, hi, how are you?
Hi, Mary.
Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed your speech and fascinated by the experience you have, and it's an honor to be here and listening to you. One question that I had, it was about, you mentioned something about Airbnb, and you mentioned that you don't want to be a shareholder at this time for Expedia because of the near, basically the future of that business. May I please ask to explain a little bit more, please?
Certainly. Now, my view, please don't make any investment decisions based on what I said. So, no, but the large online travel agents have taken control of a huge amount of the world's hotel inventory. And some of the larger companies are pushing back and trying very hard to diminish their reliance on these groups because the transaction costs are so high. And what my concern and sort of sense of might be happening is Airbnb uses very similar technology to what the online travel agents do. I mean, they are selling individual rooms, generally people's homes or apartments, but the technology is the same. And they are able to do their transactions at a much lower cost than an online travel agent. And recently, I think it was last year, Airbnb bought a booking business called Hotels Tonight. And I think that's the first step. If they were to start taking or offering the opportunity to hotel companies or individual hotels or hotel companies to sell rooms through their platform, they have the same ability to reach the same number of people as an online travel agent. They have the same sort of technology. They have the same ability to accept payments and to reimburse the accommodation owners as as the OTAs, but they can do it at a much lower cost. And I think that's where there's risk for the online travel agents, really coming from two sides. When you look at hotel loyalty programs, originally they were designed to sort of capture loyalties, make them sticky and not want to change their loyalty to the hotel companies they stayed when they traveled. But these days, their main advantage is that it's a requirement if you want to earn points that you book direct, thereby bypassing the online travel agents. So the hotel companies on one side are trying really hard to reduce their reliance on OTAs. And then the OTAs are also facing threats, particularly, I think, from Airbnb, of other ways of doing business that can be transacted at a lower cost.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Rob, this is Chris, can you hear me?
I can, and I can see you too, Chris.
Have you noticed that our good mutual friend Ron Roy is on the call?
I have seen a familiar face, yes.
He's waving at you.
What's through me, Mr. Roy, was the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge in the background. But you're on mute, Ron, so you better unmute yourself. I can just see your lips moving. Oh, there you are.
I should be in politics then, shouldn't I? I don't know how that became the background, but it always comes up now when I do Zoom. So it's quite nice. So I just leave it like that.
Well, it's
wonderful to see you, my friend.
It's a foggy day in San Francisco, Ron.
Yes.
There's the cloud over the bay, and there's Ron. So, no, I hope you're well.
Mr. Well, thank you.
Folks, this gentleman, Mr. Ron Roy, is the reason that I know Mr. Owen, and is one of the reasons why I've enjoyed this business. He's a wonderful colleague and friend. I haven't seen him for a long time, although we do communicate from time to time.
That's true.
Marvellous to see you, Ron.
Nice to see you.
You're the reason I'm here today.
Are you still in lockdown in Melbourne?
Yes, we are. Don't remind me. It's terrible.
Yeah, must be awful.
It is. I think the only city that's in a worse state than us in terms of lockdown is Santiago in Chile. They're only allowed out twice a week. We can at least go out once a day.
So what's happening to the hotel business in Victoria then? Is there any hotel business?
Well, in Melbourne, it's decimated. It's effectively closed. Regional, the rest of the state is now opening up. Some hotels are being used as quarantine facilities.
Right.
People, I mean, there's not much travel coming in. There are Australians that are returning from overseas who need to do 2 weeks in isolation, so hotels are being used for that. Some hotels have limited inventory available. It's interesting, I was speaking to the head of Hyatt. Hyatt has their Australian headquarters in Melbourne, and they've got 2 very nice hotels in the city. And they are saying they're getting quite a strong demand for high-price suites. People are just getting sick of staying at home and want a few months in a nice environment. I mean, it's not enough to keep them going, but the rest of the country is recovering reasonably well, Ron.
That's good.
Now, they're running in places like Brisbane, Sydney, Perth, around 50% occupancy. that's enough to sort of keep the lights on and, you know, keep things going. It's not enough probably for debt service and, you know, making a profit, but it's, you know, getting people back to work and getting moving again.
Right. Good. Well, that sounds encouraging.
Yes, well, I mean, we've just had a state government here that's taken a very draconian approach to this. They had a misstep early on. They had breaches of quarantine, which created a second wave, and that's what's caused it. So they're very nervous about moving forward, but the infection rate's dropping and
Right.
mortality as well. So we hope within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we should start to sort of get a bit more freedom to move around.
Good.
Rob, I have it's Chris again. I have a question.
Right.
Yes.
I want Rob to mention his language capability with his relocations to China and to Japan, and if he speaks other languages.
I am nothing like Mr. Roy, who is a linguist. I speak a rudimentary version of Japanese, but in Hong Kong, the language of business was and still largely is English. I mean, when I was there, it was under British control. In China, no one expected us to speak Mandarin at that time. I mean, it's different now. So yes, I can get in a taxi in Tokyo and go where I want to be and have a basic conversation, but I can't negotiate a contract. So I have, yes, limited Japanese and a strange form of English.
What other questions have we got for Rob?
Mr.
Regarding-
Wilson, related to that, with your experience in managing properties across Asia and in Australia, what are some of the cultural differences that you noticed in managing people? Or, you know, are there any differences that you noticed and that you could tell our students about?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dean. Yes, and it's not language. I mean, language obviously is a challenge, but unlike Australians, and I think you can say the same for Americans and perhaps even a number of Brits, most other countries do a better job of having their folks speaking second languages and knowledge of English. But certainly in my first time experience working overseas was in Hong Kong. And it's this concept of face, which is similar to pride, but not quite the same. But it's really sort of someone's, you know, sense of personal worth, if you like. And I remember I'd been there a couple of weeks and one of the secretaries in the office burst into tears. And I mean, it was clear I was responsible, but I had no idea what I'd said or done. And one of my Chinese colleagues, I said, "What's going on? Why is Betty so unhappy?" He said, "Well, you made her lose her face." I said, "Well, I'm terribly sorry, but I had no idea what I had said or done." And over time, my radar got more attuned and sort of directed, and I started to realize how, for people, how they're treated and how they're seen is really important. And some of the things that we just take for granted and let just brush off can sort of cut deep to others. And I tried to learn, and I think I became quite good at it over time, of understanding that when I was in a place that had a different culture and was based on perhaps different faiths and different history and heritage, to then just take a different view and to be respectful of that. Families are terribly important in many cases, and you know, in terms of, I mean, another experience in Hong Kong where we had a group of secretaries in the office, but they had different titles, and the HR department, in its wisdom, decided to make these all common titles for the support staff. And again, severely upset. It was mainly women at that time, and someone who'd been known as an executive secretary became a secretary. Well, and often they were compensated with a pay increase, but their view was if they go home and tell their parents that they're no longer an executive secretary but a secretary, even though they've had a pay increase, it would seem that they have done something wrong. So I think it's just being very aware of different cultures and the different way that people see their self-worth, and it's just a matter of really a heightened level of respect. I mean, ways this is done is different. I know in time I've spent a bit of time in India. Most of the support staff and officers are men. Secretaries and admin assistants are men. You rarely see women working in an office. You do more so now. I think the whole world is starting to realise, you know, this extraordinary resource that's out there called women that can do jobs just as well as men. But I think to your point, Dean, is just, yes, being very mindful of where you are and that values can change from place to place.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful.
I have a question.
Is your background from India?
I'm sorry?
Is your background from India?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Which part of India did you come from?
I was born in the south, Hyderabad. Have you been there?
I have been to Hyderabad. I actually spent a bit of time in Hyderabad. We had an assignment in Hyderabad 3 or 4 years ago, and I spent several weeks in Hyderabad.
Right. But you might be surprised to hear this, but my son is a Kiwi.
Really?
Yep. I was a visiting faculty in New Zealand, and he was born there. So he has 2 passports. We call him a little Kiwi surprise.
Well, that's wonderful. Yes. Oh, that's great. You're an international family.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Ms. Turner,
Yes, sir.
you have a question.
Yes, sir, I do.
Go right ahead.
Hi, Mr. Robert. My name is Brittany Turner, as Mr. Rowan has mentioned. And I am in my first semester in a grad program. I do want to thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Our privilege, for gracing us with your presence. I would like to know, since you've studied since you had the opportunity to go to like different countries and stuff, and you say that you been to Japan, like what was your greatest challenge in Japan?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. And because my working challenges were probably greatest in Japan, anyway, I mean, over time they came used to it, but I found my first overseas job was in Hong Kong, and I found it reasonably easy, despite what I said earlier about taking a while to understand the concept of face. But people in Hong Kong were very adaptable, and they could change direction quickly and go down a different course. The challenge I found in Japan was, and they were wonderful people and they worked hard, but there was a strong resistance to change. And a lot of them who worked for international companies found it difficult because the hierarchy of an American corporation or a British corporation is quite different to that of a Japanese one. And it's a culture, I mean, Japan has a history that goes back 4,000 years. It's one of the most homogeneous societies in the world. Vast majority of people are pure Japanese. They haven't had a background of immigration from other countries. So it's very much a single race and single nationality. And they're very proud of the way they do things. So going to work with a foreign group in Japan, it took quite a lot of adjusting. And it had to be, I was the one who had to make the adjustment, not them. I wasn't going to change Japan. They would not going to change me. I had to go about business in the way I interacted in a different way. And it just took some time. But no, it's a very perceptive question, Brittany. And it comes a bit back to Dean's question about different cultures.
Thank you. Understood.
You have a question so far, I know.
Hi,
I have
Susanna.
a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Is the hospitality business better in America or overseas, like in Australia or like the time you spent in China?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that, Jessia.
I say, is the hospitality business better in America or overseas, like in Australia?
I think it's wonderful wherever it is, quite frankly. I think there are differences, but the essence of hospitality is the same the world over. I mean, it's about making people feel comfortable, making them feel safe, delighting them in every way that you can. They have a positive experience. The issues such as cleanliness and delivery of service are equally important, whether it's in Memphis, it's in Melbourne, it's in Hyderabad, it's in San Francisco, where Mr. Roy is. It's the same in that
No, I'm
sense.
not. I'm in Miami. It's just the background.
Oh, the Miami Bay Bridge in the background.
It's the Golden Gate Bridge in Miami. Yeah.
But let's see. Look, it's the things are done differently from country to country. I mean, language, cultures vary, but the whole premise of hospitality, of taking care of folk when they're traveling, is pretty universal. What you learn here, you could apply virtually anywhere. Sao Paulo, Madrid, Sydney, Hong Kong. It's hospitality in that sense is very similar. I mean, there are differences in different countries where, because of cost of labour, you can get a higher level of service. For example, in India, because they can afford to put more people in, and there's a higher touch point in terms of service. But the principles are the same across the world. I haven't stayed in a hotel anywhere where it's been vastly different in that sense.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Annan had a question. Is she there?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I also
Susanna, I'm sorry.
So my name's Susanna Smith, and I'm just starting grad school and all that. And I've traveled as well to a lot of countries, and it's fascinating seeing everyone's personalities and their belief system. My question to you is, like, going from Japan to China to Australia to London, how are you individually able to adapt to change? Sometimes people has a hard adjustment to traveling or to work with different people. What is your advice to adapting to change?
Again, very perceptive question. I think it's to realize that when you're outside your home country, you are a guest in the other country. You are the one that needs to change, not them. And as I said, the fundamentals of our business are universal, but there are differences. I mean, different foods, different styles of living, different styles of commuting. Remember, be where you are. So if you're in London, you're in Britain. They have a culture. They have different things. Try and learn, about what they're interested in. They're fanatic about soccer, football. In other parts of the world, they're not. In Japan, they're nuts about baseball, very similar to the US. I mean, where I come from in Australia, it's hardly played. And as I said earlier, with sort of the importance of families, some are much more tightly bound together than very much the nuclear family model is, and perhaps in Australia and the US are a bit more dispersed. So I think it's just be where you are. I mean, that might sound sort of a bit silly and basic, but it really is important to be in the country you're in, take an interest in what they're interested in, and try and adapt. And if you do that, you'll find the welcome just gets warmer. I mean, even if you can't speak the language, as long as you can, the basics of hello, thank you, excuse me, there are only 3 or 4 words that's enough if you're in Japan or in China, they know you are trying and they will welcome you with open arms. I mean, humans are marvelous in that sense. I mean, the fundamental things that make us tick are the same the world over. They really are. I mean, just looking at the faces on the screen, we all come from different backgrounds and have different heritage. But the things that sort of drive us all are pretty much the same. You cut us open, we're all the same on the inside. But it's just a respect and acknowledgement of where you are. And if you do that, whether it's an office environment or a social environment, you'll be fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Wilson, I have a question for you as well. My name is Felipe Rocha. I'm originally from Brazil, so I can relate to
I saw you last week.
Yeah. I'm in grad school here at Memphis. So first, thank you for speaking with us. It's very, very good to hear from someone that has a lot of experience. So I was reading your background and also listening to you. I do have one question about your personal growth. What type of advice you could tell yourself back when you're in school, in our age? Something that you could tell yourself, man, I wish you could tell Mr. Wilson back at the time. Something that you learned throughout your career that you wish you could tell yourself a long time ago.
Well, like most people have been on this planet for a while. I mean, I've had a few missteps on the way, but none of them have been that serious. But I think for folk, you know, those of you in school still, and from a professional point of view, I'd urge you to actually manage your careers. And that might sound a bit strange, but it's over the years I've been involved in recruiting a lot of people and in different places, and the fundamentals are the same. Try and imagine where you will be in 10 years' time, what you want to do, and plot a path. I mean, it's not so much like a business plan, but just know where you're at. Manage your resumes. Imagine what it's going to look like if you're sitting 10 years from now in front of someone being interviewing for a job that you're keen to get, and they're looking at your resume. You want something that's sort of going to stand out. And there's some basic rules, I think, is number one, try not to hop jobs. If you're an employer and you're looking at someone who's presenting very well, but you've seen over the last 10 years they've had 8 jobs, and they've always got a reason why they changed their job and it's never their fault, it's a red light. Now, I'm not saying you stay in the one job for the same, you know, forever. I spent a long time with what was the Holiday Inn organisation, and at one point, you know, I had a headhunter telling me I'd stayed too long in with the one company. But just be careful on that side to do that. And if you do change jobs, always make sure to step up. Don't go sideways, and certainly don't go backwards. I mean, while money is important, we all need money to live. Sometimes you may not get the growth in the salary, but if it's a growth in experience or in responsibility, it may be a step worth taking. But please all be proactive in managing your path. I mean, at the end of the day, you're in charge of your resume and what's on it. Sometimes jobs just don't work out. Sometimes you lose jobs through no fault of your own. That's fine. We have to move on. And I mean, right now is a very difficult time for a lot of people, you know, in terms of their jobs being at risk. But really sort of keep an eye on that, and sort of always keep an eye on the horizon. 10 years out, where do you like to be? I mean, I heard Daniel Deloma last week saying that he had a goal to be a vice president by the time he was 30. I had a goal. I was not as ambitious as him. I'd probably be one by the time I was 40. But that's the sort of thing. It was, you know, it was important. It was going to be a milestone in my life, and it had nothing to do with money. But it was sort of would be a, you know, sort of a mark that I had reached an aspiration or achieved an aspiration that I had. It may be to work in another country. It may be, you know, to work for a particular hotel company. At the time I went to Marriott, I was very proud because then Marriott was, I think, perceived as one of the finest hotel companies. They're still a very good company, but I think, you know, there are other very strong ones now. But in those days, I mean, that was almost the gold standard. So yes, just keep an eye out for yourself, and just make sure that as you move forward in your professional careers, that you do actually proactively manage your path, because you're the one who's ultimately in charge.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
You're welcome, Felipe.
Excuse me. I have some question actually.
Sure.
I mentioned you talk about you used to be to China and Hong Kong and some kind of about Western country. So because I'm Chinese, I know actually in Hong Kong they still do just like the tip to the waitress or waiter, but in main China they don't do it. So you think tip is a good thing or is a bad thing? Do you think there have any influence really about the service?
I think a lot depends. I mean, you're absolutely right that you know, even in Australia, tipping is not that common. In the United States, it's almost, you know, it's mandatory. A lot of it, I think, has to do with the income that is being earned, you know, by the wait or the service staff. I think in different regions too, and some of it's regulated. In the US, casual staff don't earn a lot of money, and the sort of people who have those jobs. And they would find it hard to survive if they didn't get extra payments in the form of tips or gratuities. In Australia, wages are regulated, and people who are working in a restaurant or a housekeeper or so forth are actually earning a reasonably good income. So they don't need to supplement it. I think in China, they have this concept of a service charge on the tip, on your check. So you'll see the total amount for your food, for example. They will be the taxes added, and then there will be a service charge, which is often in the range of 10%. That service charge is normally meant to be then shared amongst the staff. Now, some employers may not do the right thing there, but I know certainly in Hong Kong, it was very much concerned that that service, the amount was raised there, was then given back to the staff in one form or another. It might have been in the form of Christmas gift, a bonus, or a staff party, or something like that. So different countries have different ways of doing things. So I know visitors to the US, certainly for the first time, are a little shocked that it's, you know, tipping is almost mandatory. And if you walk out and you haven't tipped, I mean, it's a pretty bad thing to do. That's not the same. And I think, you know, your background is from China. Did you ever work in China?
Yes, I actually work in China and in America. So I know actually they have just basically the same salary. I mean, including the tips. But just like whatever in China, you do good service, you do bad service, you can get a tip. I mean, including in your salary. So I just feel like definitely if you didn't get the good service, you can just like call the manager or say something. But I don't think it's just like you can do it or not do it, but no one will say it.
Yeah, that's very similar to here where I am in Australia too. Look, if you've had exceptional service, most people will pay a tip. You know, and if you hadn't had good service, they don't. Whereas I think my sense of the US, and I, you know, while I've spent time in the US, I haven't actually lived and worked in the United States, but tipping is sort of almost seen as mandatory. And you'll get on the check, you'll have a list of, you know, 10%, 15%, 20% to calculate the tips. And I think even in China, I mean, there was a point in my life I traveled to China, and to me, China and Hong Kong were sort of quite different in that sense. Yes, of course, if you had great service, you would, you know, you'd leave an extra 100 RMB or whatever. But I think a lot of Asia, it is based on the service charge concept, where it is charged and then it's then kept for the staff and distributed separately. I don't think that happens in the United States. It doesn't happen here. So look, it's part of it. So I think it's a cultural thing, but part of it is also, you know, on how much the service staff are being paid and how much they need to rely on that or not. But I certainly think the way it's done in China and Hong Kong and other parts of Asia is good, because there is that extra component that goes to the staff. It's discretionary. You do great service, you'll get a good tip. If you don't, you won't.
Thank you.
Probably hasn't really helped much. It's just a point of view, but but I mean, it's a very important part of people's compensation in many countries.
I think so.
Yes, it is. Hello, Carol.
Hi, I have a question for you. Earlier in our conversation, you talked about the hotelization.
Yes.
Yes, of industries. Do you see that as a separate growth, like someone entrepreneurial could set up a company that does that for industries? Or do you see that as in each organization that being a separate facet or position that they would hire within, say, the individual business?
I think it's both, Carol. And what I think, I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a firm here in Melbourne called First Contact that provides staff to big office buildings to man their information and concierge desks. They recruit solely from the hotel business, and it has been run by people who had careers originally in the hotel business. Another example is one of the large real estate companies here, a company called Colliers, which I think is pretty much a global real estate firm, has now providing that as one of their building management services. A bank that I go to has always had nice reception staff there. And I was amazed to find out just recently that they weren't bank employees, they actually belonged to the building manager. I mean, they carried the identification of it. So I think it's across the board. And I think, as I said earlier, it's very much has its roots in the hotel business, but it's being spread. So there's specialist groups that are doing this, entrepreneurs, as you said, who're setting up businesses to take advantage of this. There are other companies that see this as a way of enhancing their service and drawing on the experience and sort of attributes of hoteliers.
Great.
But it's certainly starting to get traction here, and I would imagine it is elsewhere too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Rob, I'm sorry, but we have to leave you.
Well, I'm sorry too, Chris. Look, I've enjoyed this, guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this time with you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I really appreciate it. I know it's you woke up very early, maybe you do, but it's very early in the morning there, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Yes,
well, thank you so much. For, I think, Mr. Roy, thank you. You facilitated this.
Thank you, Mr. Roy.
Very grateful. I hope to see you here one day. Chris, I'm looking forward to staying in touch and exchanging notes on our shared interest other than hotels.
We're going to do that, Rob. It's better. I'm going to send you a picture in about 15 minutes.
Please do. But to everybody else, look, good luck with your studies. I wish you well with your careers. You've made a great choice in the path you want to take. Take care of yourselves and your families, but I wish you a most fulfilling career in the hotel business. The business will be grateful to have you as part of it. So well done all.
Come visit us, Rob.
Do the same. Thank you.
I look forward to it. I will.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you next week.